Let's now examine the type of layout called absolute layout. This layout is used to position and size the controls using explicit values. The position is specified by the upper left corner of each control relative to the upper left corner of the absolute layout in device-independent units. This layout also implements a proportional positioning and sizing function. Let's see it in action. And for this I created a new project called Absolute Layout Demo and created a page called Absolute Layout Page. For this example, to be better appreciated, I am going to change the background color of this content page, and we're going to use, for example, a dark red color. Next, we're going to remove this stack layout and instead we're going to use the type Absolute Layout. Let's proceed to create a couple of buttons. Let's change the main page from app.saml.cs. Let's launch the application to see what this layout looks like. Once the application has been launched, we can see the background of the content page and we have these controls located at the top left of the absolute layout container. We see that the elements are positioned one on top of the other. And this is the default behavior of this layout. If you do not specify where you want to place the controls, they will be positioned at the top left. Let's go back to Visual Studio and let's make some modifications to see how this layout works in a better way. The controls that belong to an absolute layout are going to have a couple of properties that we're going to be able to access through absolute layout, and they are called layout bounds and layout flags. Let's first examine this property called layout bounds, and we're going to apply this property to this first button that has the text click me. What you have to know when working with this property is that you must specify an X value, a Y value, a width and a height to indicate where an element, in our case the button, is going to be placed specifically. We can use some values, as for example we want to place the control in the X position 0 and the Y position at value 300. For the width we indicate a value 250 and for the height value we specify a value 100. We are specifying only absolute values, and with this change that we have applied, we already see the preview of the first button and the second button that we have modified. Look how this button that has the text click me has taken precisely the values that we have indicated previously. This is how this layout behaves in case you want to work with absolute values, but we can also work with percentages. How can we activate these percentages? Well, we have to access the second property called layout flags. As part of the different values that we can assign to this property, we have different values that end with the text proportional, which means that we can work with percentages to place the element and to assign a height and a width to the control relative to its parent container. Then we can specify, for example, a height proportional value with which we will indicate that we need the height of the button to be proportional. If you remember, we had indicated that the first value was the X value, the Y value, the width value, and the height value. Therefore, the value that we're going to be able to modify proportionally is only the height. We must specify a value from 0 to 1 to indicate what percentage we want to assign to this height value. And in this case we will specify that we want 50% for the height. Save the changes and look how the height of this control has increased. In fact, if we look closely, the height corresponds to 50% of the total screen. That is to say, we have a height that is going to take as a base the total height of the container, which in this case is the absolute layout, and it's going to obtain that 50% to place the height of the button. If we wanted, for example, to have a proportional width and height, we should change this value to size proportional. With this change, we must modify the penultimate value. Let's indicate that we also want a 50% for this button. With this change, the width of the control has been modified, and we are using 50% of the total value of the absolute layout. If, on the other hand, we wanted the width to use the entire width of the absolute layout, we could modify this value to a value of 1. We save the changes, and this time the button is using the full width of the absolute layout. Just as we are working with proportional values for the size, we can also work with proportional values for the positioning of an element. For example, if we wanted to affect the position of the control proportionally, we should use one of the values we see here, for example, x proportional, y proportional, or position proportional. But what would happen if we wanted to, for example, use the proportional size and, in addition to that, use, for example, x proportional? Well, we would do it by first selecting size proportional, placing a comma, and then the second value we would like to use, for example, x proportional. In this way, we would already be affecting 3 values, but the horizontal and vertical sizes and also the x position. We will then modify this value so that instead of 0, it is equal to 0.5. That is, it will be located exactly at 50% of our screen in its x value. I'm also going to modify this value 1 to a 0.5 value that affects the width value. I'm going to save the changes to make this look better. And in the emulator, notice how the button is being positioned right in the center of the screen. Finally, if we wanted all the values to be proportional, we should use the value called all to be able to use only proportional values. In this case, I'm going to assign a value 0.5 for each one of the values, and if we return to the emulator, we see how the button is exactly centered, using 50% for both the width and the height, taking as a base the values of the main container that is the absolute layout.